The Holy Gospel, according to Matthew, the 14th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now when Jesus heard about the beheading of John the Baptist, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then Jesus ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. All ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. I'd like to focus today on the verse. Jesus says to the disciples, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." Today, we have the story of the feeding of the 5,000. It's one of the most familiar texts in the whole Bible, if not in the New Testament. And we preach on it every year, and then if you have a Thanksgiving service, and then if you do a stewardship campaign, it usually shows up. And we often focus on different things. We might focus on the abundance that Jesus provides for the community here. Or perhaps we focus on the way Jesus takes the loaves in the Gospel of Matthew and blesses and breaks them. The only other place uses that word is in the Lord's Supper. Or perhaps the way that Jesus has them all sit down, and we can talk about being still and knowing who God is. All of those valid interpretations, you've probably heard sermons on them. But today I'd like to start with a question that I think, because most of us are in the middle class, we don't ask very often. Here we have 5,000 men as well as women and children. We don't know how many in total, but presumably about 10,000 people there. And they're there all day, and they're in a crisis. They have no food. Jesus then, of course, has a miraculous feeding. But did you ever wonder, how come with nearly 10,000 people there, nobody thought to bring food along with them? Or why didn't, at the end, when the disciples have to say, "Hey, shouldn't we let them go buy some things?" couldn't they have left on their own to go buy some things? Well, there might be a clue. They're there all day. How were they there all day? It was not the Sabbath. And if it wasn't the Sabbath, it was a work day. Shouldn't they be working? They're not. And I don't think this is a group of the independently wealthy. These are people who have no employment. They didn't bring any food with them because they probably have no food. They stay there all day because likely they have nowhere else to go. Very likely they have no lodgings. These are likely the most desperate people who don't even have a loaf of bread among them. So then the disciples' statement to Jesus doesn't just sound kind of dismissive, it sounds almost mean. Send the crowds away so that they might go into the villages and buy food for themselves. I think we're supposed to be able to hear this dripping with irony. They can't buy food. If they could have, they would have already. But there's even more, because that little verb, send them away, it's apalumi if you're interested. It can mean send away, dismiss, release. It also can mean destroy. It's probably not the primary meaning here, but it's still there. Send them away. Get rid of them. because they can go buy their own food. That's awful hard to defend. I always feel for the disciples, but this is a tough one. They just don't want to deal with it. And then it makes more sense with Jesus' response, saying, don't send them away. You give them something to eat. Even if it's not clear how that's going to happen, they can't go buy food. You can't just duck this responsibility. But there's something he does here. They wanted to send him away, and Jesus says to them, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. Notice Jesus did not say, I will give them something to eat. He's charging the disciples to do something, and it is a teaching moment. They're going to learn from this. This passage is not just a miracle story to see the power of Jesus, because after all, Jesus is providing one meal for these people. They're going to be in the same situation in the morning. This is a teaching moment to show the way that God works in our lives. So also, this is a story where the disciples don't look great. But I also wonder if we might have a little compassion on them, because they might not be so different from us. They have something like 10,000 people there. There is no way they can feed them all. They have 5 loaves and 2 fish. I don't think we need to interpret this as them saying, no, I don't really care about these crowds. They're just awful and I don't want to help them. I don't think that's true in the slightest. I think they understood that their calling was to care for the poor and the marginalized, to welcome the widow and the orphan, to feed the hungry. I think they completely knew that, but they looked at the situation in front of them and said, that might be true, but I honestly cannot understand how I can do that. How many of us have been right there? We absolutely know our calling, and when we see the scale of the need in front of us, Jesus, I don't know how. The scale of the challenges of our world that, while very different, I think are commensurate at some level, at least with the feeling. Our calling to house the homeless, to feed the hungry, to stand with the marginalized, to go do that, the challenges feel so large, and our ability to respond to them seems so small. It's not hard for us to imagine us saying, I simply don't have the ability to help you. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to go away and try to buy bread for yourselves. It's one of the greatest challenges I have in ministry, where I don't have the means to be able to help someone for the very real present need in front of me. And Jesus says to them and to us, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. How? The obvious huge surprise is that Jesus does provide food where there was no food. But first, I think there's a clue if we look at the charge. You give them something to eat. Notice Jesus did not say, provide them enough food for every last person to be filled completely. He says only, give them something to eat. There might be some freedom in that. Sometimes we could be so paralyzed by the practical call of Christ is that we misunderstand it. We think so frequently in terms of result, that unless I could solve this completely, then just what's the point? If the disciples would have said, we don't know how we could feed all these people, Jesus could have responded, I never asked you to. Just give them something to eat. What do you have? 5 loaves, 2 fish, great. Give it to them. But you could almost hear, 5, what's that going to do? 5 loaves. That is that result-based thinking we so frequently fall into. Jesus didn't call us to solve all the world's problems in the world. He called us to serve. Serve with what we have where we are. Then, of course, what happens is they do it, and something amazing occurs. Something they would have never dreamed was possible. Them providing what they had actually did feed everyone. But they didn't see that. And the reason Jesus doesn't call us to find all the results as if to say, let's go fix all of this, let's look for the strategy and do it all, is because after all, it's not our work in the first place. Jesus is the one who does the real work in this miracle. You give them something to eat, and you'll notice they did give the bread. Jesus was the one doing the real work. Jesus was the one meeting their real need. That's what's behind all of this. If these disciples would have said, I don't know how to feed all these people, Jesus might have said, no, you don't know, and that's okay. Because the impact of how we work in this world isn't up to us. As a former teacher, it would happen frequently when someone would come up to me on campus and say, I really appreciated what I learned in New Testament and it made me help think differently and so forth, so thankful. And I had no idea who I was talking to. We don't often get to know what our impact is when we meet people with simply what we have. This is the teaching moment of this miracle. Everywhere people are hungering for the respite from the weights they're carrying. It is all kinds of weights we're carrying. For some, yes, indeed, it is they don't have enough food. For others, it's adequate shelters. For others, it's deeply emotional. It's the crushing burden of being alone and isolated and rejected and wounded. And we're carrying all of that burden, not knowing where to turn. It might be spiritual, for feeling completely unloved and falling into despair. And despair is where we don't even understand to look, even if we could look around us. It is a life that is not just hard physically, but a life that can have no meaning, of being lost in the void. We know people in that space. We are people in that space at different places in our lives. And to that, we are called to you give them something to eat. And do we have enough to fully feed them? Well, in one sense, no. Or at least we don't think so. But we so frequently say, that's beyond me, you're going to have to buy bread somewhere else. But Jesus calls us, just bring what you have. Just give them something to eat. And then see what God is doing. We are the means, God is the worker. We are called to bring ourselves, and through us, God can turn whatever meager 5 loaves we have into enough for all to be sated. I think at heart here, this story is a story about value and valuing people. Valuing people who are in need and valuing people who feel they only have a little and not enough to give. Jesus says, you do have enough. You have value on both sides of the dynamic. Just bring what you have. Provide something to eat. And through that, let Christ feed us all. Amen.